Hi, my name is Andrew, and I'm the admissions counselor for the Doctor of Ministry program at Tyndale Seminary. I just want to welcome you to this online information session for our ministry leadership track. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm here joined with Michael Kraus. He's the track coordinator for the ministry leadership track, and we'll be hearing more from him a little bit later. But I just wanted to introduce the program a little bit, give some broad outlines of some things that across all of the tracks that are common to all three of our tracks. Of course, we have ministry leadership, spiritual formation, and preaching and communications, which is our newest one. We will be doing online information sessions for all three of them. So if you would like to get the recording of those other ones, you can just let me know, and we'll send those out when those become available. So the Doctor of Ministry program at Tyndale is quite unique, we think. It's a in-ministry-based Doctor of Ministry program, which means you must be in a ministry setting, what we call a substantive ministry setting, and we'll talk more about what that means. We do go beyond a traditional sort of Sunday morning preaching type of a role, although that is certainly okay as well. But you must be in a ministry setting, and that goes to the difference between a Doctor of Ministry as a professional doctorate and a research doctorate like a PhD. And essentially the difference is that a professional doctorate is intended to enhance your professional work in your professional setting. So you have to be in your case, you might be in a church or a parachurch organization where that setting almost becomes your laboratory, as opposed to a research doctorate, which doesn't necessarily require a specific setting in which to take place. So we're here in the Doctor of Ministry program to help enhance your professional practice and help you take it to where you discern that God would like you to take it. It is a collaborative program, and so it is a cohort model. So we do sort of begin you with a group of people, and then those are the group of people that you will journey with the program through the program. This helps build a really cohesive group, and as you probably know, I'm sure, if you're watching this, ministry can sometimes, especially leadership, can be sometimes isolating. You don't always have a lot of people you can talk to about some of your challenges, some of your problems. And when you're here with a group of people you may never have met before, it provides a really safe space for you to talk about some of the challenges you're facing in your ministry. And so that's why we do it as a cohort model. Some good news also with this program is the way we've formed it is we've combined your research project with your coursework. So a traditional model would have you do 2 years of coursework in a supported environment, and then you would be left alone to do your writing with occasional check-ins with your committee. And this model in the humanities yields about a 50% success rate. We'd like to improve on that. And so what we've done is we've combined your coursework with your research, and so you'll do both simultaneously. And this has yielded approximately 82% have finished the program. And most can finish it within 3 to 4 years. So that's some really great news, that if you start it, you follow along with what we're saying to do, you stand a very good chance of finishing it and reaching that the end point that you desire. We are, of course, ATS accredited, which is very important, so the degree is recognized all over. So we are also we'll talk about this more, but we also take the approach that we want to grow you as the leader, and we want to help you grow your setting. So if you're a traditional sort of Sunday morning preaching church model, your congregation. We want to help you discover who you are as a leader and also how you will help your congregation. So it's inward facing and outward, but we'll talk about that more with Michael. Ministry setting, we'll get to that in a bit. We do, like I say, define the ministry setting quite broadly. We will accept and consider a wide range of ministry settings. So if you're thinking, I'm not a senior pastor who has a traditional church, don't worry about that. We've had numerous people come to us from a number of different settings, and we'll get to that a little bit later. Just some demographics for you. We have had students as young as 27 and as old as 77. So if you're somewhere in that range, you're probably okay. This was originally designed as a mid-career doctorate, that you'd have some years behind you in ministry. Pardon me, that you'd have some years behind you in ministry, but we will consider applications from all sorts of folks. We really do, as a committee, delve into your personal situation and to see where you are, where you're at, what's your ministry experience, what's your education, what's your desire, where are you feeling led, and where does the committee feel you fit in. So 27 to 77, we've had students of all ages. And we're about a 5-to-2 male-female ratio. Certainly we would love to have more women in the program helping us flesh out the leadership of the church today. But right now we're sitting at a 5-to-2 for the whole program, for all 3 tracks. So that's a broad overview of the program. 3 to 4 years, integrating your research and your coursework, and an 82% completion rate is phenomenal, we think. So now I'm just going to introduce Michael. This is Dr. Michael Kraus. He's the track leader for the ministry leadership track, and I'm just going to ask him to give a little bit of your background, and then maybe you could just introduce the program.
Great,
the track.
Thanks. Yeah, my name's Michael Kraus. I've been here at Tyndale for about 3.5 years now, and just starting the coordination of the ministry leadership track and the Doctor of Ministry program. My background is best described as eclectic, I think. So I've spent time in a lot of different ministry contexts. So as a youth pastor, as working with kind of marginalized youth for a while, as a senior pastor, I've been a church planter as well. I've been working at different places in my ministry, so including a nonprofit. So I worked at Yonge Street Mission for a number of years, directing the ministry at Evergreen, where we had 15 to 20 staff that I supervised, plus probably 100 volunteers that were part of that process as well. And so that volunteer management piece, the kind of staff supervision, ministry leadership, the strategy about what it means to work in that context, in a challenging context too. I've also done some church planting. So we planted a church in just north of the city in a fairly strong Jewish neighborhood, and we did a network of house churches, basically to see how do we connect, how do we disciple, how do we work with people who are pretty non-traditional in terms of church attendance. And so worked at that for a number of years. I've also received my coaching certification, so that really ties in well with the leadership track. We do have a number of people who operate as coaches within the track, which really help our students in terms of helping them decide and name the questions that they're trying to answer in that process. And now my role here at Tyndale is the director of the internship program, so I place students in ministry contexts. I also teach leadership at the graduate level at the master's degree, and then now I'm teaching a few courses at the Doctor of Ministry program as well. And so this kind of my background has given me pretty broad spectrum of leadership opportunities in different areas, and has challenged probably my background being fairly traditional and trying to look at leadership in new and different ways. So that's it.
Okay. That's great. That's it. That's all he's done, folks.
Yeah.
That's done. Great. So what can you tell us about the leadership track?
Okay. The leadership track is really, as Andrew was saying, a 3-year program incorporating 12 courses, but those 12 courses, of course, include the projects that you're working on. And also an integration course that pulls all of those together. And so each of those is done on a residency basis. So we have a 1-week residency in January and then a 2-week residency in June. And each of those residencies has 2 courses. And as you move through the program, you start with the formation of a leader. So who are you as a person? Who are you as a leader? What brings those pieces together for you? We do a number of different psychometric tests with you, and also do a 360. So we get some of the feedback from the people that you work closely with, and allow you to see some of the feedback that you would get from those people. And help you do that in a context where you're able then to develop some of the areas that you're where you're strong, and also correct some of the weaknesses that you face on a regular basis. It's geared around 4 main focuses. So the first one I mentioned, the development of the leader, and who are you as a person. And the second one is action research. So that means basically you want to be doing research in a particular area. Your congregation, your ministry site is your workshop. That's the place where you're applying all of your learning, and the place where you get all your case studies, the place where you do all your examples. This is the context that you are exegeting as you're moving forward. So the context might be the local congregation or the leadership structure in your church. It might be your neighborhood, to say, what does it look like for us to be more effective in reaching out? It might be, if you're working in a nonprofit, it might be your board structure or your staffing situation or your HR issues. It might be how to recruit good staff for your organization. You know, a number of those things would be done. And so that second piece is that action research piece that you're looking specifically there. So you're looking at a specific activity, researching it, and then bringing feedback. And then once the feedback comes back, then you're going to restructure that research to say, what didn't I get? What should I have been looking for? And you get a chance to go back and correct some of the things that you missed. The third area is ministry strategy. And I think that's a real key component, is to think about, what am I doing? Why am I doing it? How do I make it better? And so that aspect of looking at the ministry strategy, you do not just by yourself, you do it in cooperation with your cohort. They give you feedback. Often some of the people that you've been working with have a lot more experience in one particular area than perhaps you have, or the profs have had. And so they'll be able to give you feedback and pushback on some of the things that are working there. And then the fourth area is ministry implementation, or basically the project that you're doing, you're going to actually perform in your work setting, in your ministry setting. And so that implementation plan at the end is the end result of your research, your action research, the formation of who you are as a leader, you're strategizing about ministry, and then saying, okay, let's put it into place. And that's the nature of a professional degree, is that you're actually trying to do something in your own context. Often what happens in a more academic degree is that it becomes ideas or ideals, and instead of kind of on-the-ground implementation of change. And so we focus a lot on saying, what can you do that will have an impact on where you are right now? That might be a plan that you've never thought about before, something that you want to see changed in your ministry context. And again, those things are worked through with the faculty, with the cohort that you're in, and certainly in your ministry site. And so that's why I love what we do here and how we present it, is that you kind of work through that in a layered process, that you're doing one piece at a time, which builds on the pieces that you've done before and helps lead you to the conclusions that you want to get to at the end. And all that's done in a very supportive environment. So that's kind of my overview.
Yeah, well, that's great.
Yeah.
And it's a couple highlights there just I want to draw out there is we are a very, very high-touch program. So you do get a lot of support.
Yeah.
We won't do the writing for you.
Yeah.
And they've already done the reading, so they don't need to do it again. But it's very high touch, very supportive, and even though you're only going to be on campus, or rather that you're only required to be on campus 3 weeks a year, you are supported throughout the program using other tools. So not just our faculty, but also your other members in the cohort, because you're all doing the same type of thing, and they do act as sort of a peer review committee, and so you're never just left out in the wind. You will feel very supported in this program, because of course we want you to succeed. This is not a program that's designed to weed you out. We want to help you fulfill what you feel is your calling to be here, to help your ministry, because that's what we're here to do, is to help you, help the broader church, and make change in our culture, however you do that. So let's talk about ministry setting for a second. So I think when people hear, oh, I have to be in ministry, a lot of them do think, okay, senior pastor, Sunday morning congregation. How broadly do we define ministry context?
I think there's a lot of options. There are a lot of options for students to be involved. So, for example, in my case, when I did my ministry thing, I was a church planter, so I worked on church planting ideas about models of church and outreach for the community. So I wasn't preaching on a regular basis. I was reaching out. I was doing a lot of evangelism. We've had other students who are working in different areas in parachurch organization, so a campus-based ministry, for example, and saying, what does that look like? And they weren't on campus, but they were one of the national leaders, and saying, how do we train our staff better? And so his focus was on training and on developing materials, resource materials for campus staff, and to onboard and to train and to bring them along and that kind of thing. So there are a lot of different options for that. We have somebody looking at doing it in the context of media. And so they are a media leader in a particular area and saying, okay, well, what does it look like to be a media professional as a Christian, have an impact both on the location that I'm at, but also in terms of how do I use that as a platform to go further. And so the leadership piece is there. I think there are lots of different options for that. We have a number of nonprofit, not-for-profit leaders doing different types of things that you might not consider traditional church ministry, and sometimes even where you're not even sometimes allowed to name the name of Jesus in particular areas. But they're looking at that from Christian perspective to say, what does my calling look like here? How do I express this in a more effective way? How do I work out my vocation in this context and make my own impact more significant? And so those kinds of things have been, again, we'll embrace that kind of thinking in terms of where you are. Again, I think probably I'm not sure if most of our students, I would say probably at least half of them would be kind of in more traditional church contexts, whether that's associate, a senior role. We've had some people who are kind of in a broader denominational perspective as well, saying what does it look like to manage a number of churches from the denominational level. How do we change those kinds of things? How do we improve our procedures and use that as the kind of the strategic piece around change? And so, again, a pretty broad spectrum of people. And again, part of it is helping you name what you want to do. And I would say, if I can go there as well, is I think one of the most significant things that we do is we help you name what your research actually is. The director of the program, Mark Chapman, is really effective at that, helping students narrow down their focus and say, what questions are you actually asking? Sometimes when we do research, we're just gathering a lot of information. But our program helps to say, what use is this information? And what kind of information do I really need to measure what I want to measure? And so asking the questions is a real significant focus for us. What questions will get you to the place that you want to get to? And then sometimes asking a different one because the first one didn't work as well. So that's, again, that action research piece where you come back and keep asking questions about the research that you're doing to say, how do I fully understand this context? How can it change? What kind of people do I need in this context? What kind of information do I need to help them kind of integrate in that thing? So that whole aspect, I think, is really good, which means that there is a broad spectrum of ministries because we can ask those questions. We can ask theologically significant questions across a broad spectrum of areas and have real clear kind of direction in that. And in the midst of all that, the process is also, in terms of ministry context, is to say, how do we pray through this? And we spend time together as a cohort praying for one another and saying, what does this look like? How do I help you? How do I pray for you? How do we break through this confusion that you're feeling about, where you want to go with your project? And so that aspect, I think, is also really supportive in terms of creating our own ministry context as a cohort. So.
No, great.
Yeah.
And I did just want to draw out one of the points there in terms of helping you name your project.
Yeah.
I want to provide some safety here for you. No one almost comes into this program with the idea where they've settled on that idea that they're going to actually research. You may come in with an idea that you think you want to research an area. In fact, in the application, one of the questions we ask you is what area of your ministry would you like to focus on? What questions are you asking? But even when you think you've come in with a small idea, we will help you refine it because it's probably still too big.
Yeah.
You're probably still asking very good questions, but they're still too large to be the final product. And so we're going to help you work on that and refine it. And one of the great things about action research, which is the type of research we do here, is in the title. It requires action. So this isn't just research you're doing for the sake of collecting data and for the sake of collecting knowledge. It requires action, and it requires that it be actionable at the end. So it's really wonderful that way. But I don't want you to think you need to come here with the perfect idea, because a whole part of this program is to help you refine that idea into what is that essential question or questions, and what is the one thing that you're trying to really solve and implement either in your current ministry or where you feel God is leading you to.
Mm-hmm.
And that is also, we were talking about this actually before we started, that while the reason you need a ministry context is because we need you to be doing your research in your ministry, part of the formational aspect of this program is it's not unusual, as part of discovering something about yourself, to feel led in a different direction. That's also normal. So there is some, shall we call it, bravery required during this process. Not just to take on the workload, which is, we'll talk about workload in a moment, but the workload which is not insubstantial, but also some bravery just in being open to where God's going to lead you in this process. Because he's going to, especially with leadership, all of our tracks have an aspect of what we might call self-exegesis, getting to know yourself, but leadership is the one where we really, really dig down with the 360 and other tools, where you will really get to know yourself better. And in doing that, you might discover answers to questions like, why does a certain thing bother you? What is it about something that is just, there's that niggling thing that you just never quite feel comfortable in a certain situation. What is that? And hopefully we help you find some answers to those questions if you'd like to find them. And as part of that, sometimes you find that you need to go in a different direction. Now, that doesn't mean you need to leave your present ministry, but maybe there's a different position within it, or you just need to reorient yourself. But there is some bravery required as part of this process, because I think it's fair to say we'd like to see you leave changed, right? You know yourself better, you know your setting better, and you've learned more about your relationship with Christ and the plans that he has for you in this world. So that's a really key piece. And just to give you maybe just one example, Michael can add in some more if he likes, but examples of what have people actually done in this track, what's actually come out of it. And one of the things that I found fascinating, because at first I remember thinking it was interesting that someone had to do a doctorate to solve this problem, was they were unsatisfied with how their boards were being run, board meetings. And so they came out with a different, better process of how to train board members, how to lead boards better. And this was something they implemented, I think, at their church level, and they were hoping to roll out to their denomination. So that's something really, really practical that hopefully will have a really positive impact on their church, but also their denomination as a whole. and that came out of all the research and the action that they did during the program here. Did you have any examples you wanted to talk about?
Well, that's about narrowing down your
Mm-hmm.
project, and I think that that's a great example. I've worked with some students who start by saying, we want to develop leaders in our church, which is a great direction, but it's too broad.
Right.
And so you have to narrow that down to say, okay, what does your church look like? So that's where you do the kind of the exegesis of your ministry context to say, what kind of leaders do you need? Do you need younger leaders? Do you need older leaders? Do you need to find ways of kind of bringing them into an awareness of leadership? So it might just be that you need to start a discipleship process instead of a leadership process, because perhaps people in your congregation aren't ready for that. And so you find that once you do your exegesis. And then the project might end up being a three-step training program where you go, step one is basic discipleship, step two might be moving into ministry, and step three might be excelling in leadership, right? And so that you could implement that as a program that goes year long in your church. And so those kinds of things will then kind of be fit to your context, because that's where you've done your research. And then the actual result will benefit your context, because you're actually raising leaders with the kind of the DNA of what you're doing here. And then that DNA comes from your biblical reading, your background reading in leadership, your reading in the biblical studies, your look at what does change management look like, what does, those kinds of things. So you implement a lot of the different learning from the different courses into kind of creating your project and forming it in a particular way. So those kinds of things are really effective. The other example with the kind of the campus ministry is that their project was restructuring their training program so that they have a strategy. And so basically the outcome was a strategy of producing materials that would help campus ministry. And so that's where that person was working. And so what they did is they restructured how they wrote material. They realized that they weren't actually researching the material they were writing well enough. And so this person created a framework, a paradigm in which said, okay, these are the steps that we take before we produce a document or a training program. And they'd found that they had no process at all. It was somebody had an idea, they started working at it, and 2 weeks later they produced a booklet. And so he was working on the theological foundations, the different research, and so he didn't create material, he created the strategy for creating material, which is now being implemented in their organization.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
I didn't know about that one. That's
Yeah.
great. Let's just talk about workload. This is a lot of work. So I want to give you some sort of an idea, some numbers. Essentially, because you, as we've mentioned many, many times, we know you're working while you're doing this program. We require you to be working. And then you're trying to get a doctorate. So the amount of work is outside of the residency. So the residencies are full-time, 3 weeks a year. 1 week in the winter, 2 weeks in the summer. The exact weeks differ depending on which track you end up in. In terms of the other times, you're looking at about a solid day. So 10 hours a week of coursework. That can be reading, it can be working on assignments, 10 hours. And then on top of that, you'll add your research. And of course, that can vary by week depending on what you're doing and where you are during the time of year. So it is at both it is on one hand a lot of work. Some of you may be able to, especially in the leadership track, integrate some of the reading you're doing for the course into the reading you would normally do as a pastor or whatever your role is anyway. If you're reading, maybe you can add in some of that, so it's sort of no extra time. And then your project on top of that. So it's not insubstantial, but at the same time, we're not trying to make it impossible for you to finish your work and have a full ministry life. But we do want you to be aware of how much work is required, so that when you come in, you're not totally taken aback by it, and so that you can plan your time appropriately during the week, so you can set up your life. Because we recognize that in order to do this program, you do have to have kind of things set up on multiple fronts. Your home life, your work life, you need support in all those areas in order to be able to do this. Did you want to speak to?
Yeah, I think it's also contingent upon your learning style.
Mm-hmm.
I know when I did my Doctor of Ministry a number of years ago, I couldn't do the 10 hours a week. It just didn't work for my personality and my schedule. But I did put those 10 hours together from time to time. So every 2 months I would take a week and just work on it. And that week was sometimes a work week, so I still had to meet with a couple of people and preach that Sunday. But I set aside certain times where I knew I could do that. And the reason is that I work best consecutively. I need to kind of find a project, work through it, do the reading, do the writing, hand it in. I find that it's more difficult for me to spread those things out. Other people can do, reading 10 minutes at a time, 25 times a day or something like that, or 50 times a week, and that if that works for you, that's great. But you need to find a way that works for that, and you have to work pretty intelligently to try to get that done. The other piece is be smart about your research. You need to get the concepts in your reading. You don't need to get every single word in your reading. And so find ways of summarizing books quickly. Use the reading skills. I forget who wrote this book, but How to Read a Book. You actually start with the table of contents, and you start with the index at the back and say, okay, what are the main topics in this book? What are the key ideas? And then you read smart through that book, and instead of reading kind of word by word, page by page, you can find highlights and get directions for some of those the readings that you do. And so again, it's a heavy workload in the sense of trying to keep up with school and all your other responsibilities at the same time. The other piece that I got from during the time that I was doing mine was a lot of grace from my board. My board would say, we know you're doing your Doctor of Ministry, and so that's why I was able to do that 1 week every once in a while, because they understood that process and understood how I worked, or I explained it to them at least. So have that negotiation and conversation, and so you have to have the conversation with your staff and your board, especially with your family, and what does that look like at home, and what's your working style, what's your learning style, and put those pieces together in a way that's successful for you.
Great. And so that actually is a good segue into talking about the admissions requirements and the application process. So the basic academic requirement is you must have a Master of Divinity degree from an accredited seminary. Pardon me. And we're looking for a B average, so a 3.0 GPA on a 4.0 scale. If you don't have a Master of Divinity, but you do have something like, say, a Master of Theological Studies or an MA of Christian Studies, something like that, and you have another graduate degree as well, maybe you've done an MTS and an MEd, that would be a classic example, you can come to us and ask for us to do an equivalency assessment, and we'll basically take your 2 graduate degrees, if that's what you have, and smash them together and see if they come out looking something like a Master of Divinity degree. So you can approach me, you can just email me, ask me to do that. In fact, I know somebody watching right now. She's waiting for me to get back to her on that, so that is something we can do. You need typically 3 years of ministry experience after your graduate studies are complete. We would like you to have some time to sort of integrate the graduate studies you've already done into your ministry before you try and come and do a DMin. The DMin is different from a PhD in many ways, but one of them is that it's not intended to follow the traditional sort of undergrad, graduate, doctorate formula where you do them all in a row. There is expected to be some time in there of formation and integration before you come and try and do your Doctor of Ministry. If you're unsure about that, certainly give me a call or send me an email.
The piece there, if I can jump in,
please.
is to say you need to learn to have actually made some mistakes.
Okay.
You need this experience of saying, okay, this isn't an ideal way of doing ministry, and we talked about that before. This is not an idealized learning, let's put all these perfect ideas in a perfect world that would work. You need to know that something might work or it might not work, and so that's why you need that ministry experience. You need to know what it feels like to work with people who don't respond the way you'd like them to respond. Or ideas that have flopped on you or haven't had the kind of success that you want. And that's where the ministry experience comes in. It just kind of helps you see what's really expected of me when I'm working in a church sometimes 40, 50, 60 hours a week, and what does that look like, and what kind of demands are on my life. So you need to have that under your belt in order to kind of move forward into this.
Right. So I guess if we put it another way, we really need the academic to bring the practitioner.
Yeah.
We need both of those aspects. If you've been sort of in the academic world for potentially 7 years, if you've done your undergrad and your graduate degree one after another, if that's sort of been your sole focus, coming into a Doctor of Ministry without that practical piece, you're really going to be behind in terms of knowing, that human piece. How have you felt interacting with other people? Because the academic world's great, we work in it, it's a great place, but it is a different, it's a whole different animal from working in a live ministry setting. But again, if you have questions about that, you can always give me a call or send me an email. The application process itself is fairly straightforward, but it does have a number of moving parts. There's a free online application. Did I say it's free? It's online. The actual online application will probably take you about 10-15 minutes to do. And then after that, we require transcripts from all of your post-secondary, so your undergraduate work as well as any graduate work you've done. We need official transcripts from those places. We require a resume. We want to know what you've done and where you've done it. And then the longest piece is the written personal statement. It's about 12 to 1,500 words, and it's fairly in-depth. There are a number of questions we need you to answer, such as your goals, what reading have you done recently. We want to get a sense of who you are, what you've done, where you've come from, so that is submitted to us as well. And then there's 3 letters of recommendation. One is an academic reference, preferably from someone you've done some graduate work with. A character reference, of course, to tell us what kind of person you are. And then the last piece is a letter of endorsement. So Michael talked earlier about how it's really important for your board or whoever oversees you in ministry to support you, and that's what the letter of endorsement is for. So this is separate from your character reference, and so if you are in church ministry, it might come from your the chair of your board. If you're in a nonprofit, it might come from whoever you report to, or any setting who you report to. And basically, they're not committing, as someone asked me recently, does this require them to commit me financially? No. If they want to, that's great. But what we need to know is that they are aware of what you want to do. They're aware of the demands it will take on your time, and that they are committed to supporting you in that. Now, what that support looks like is going to be different for every setting, but we just need to know that they're aware. What we don't want to have happen is have you come into the program and then have you a year in stall out because your board didn't know what you were doing and all of a sudden increased the demands on your time, and you then had to make a choice. And of course, if your ministry setting is what puts food on your table, it's going to be a choice probably not in favor of your education. So we just need to know that they're in favor of it. All 3 of these references do not come with rubrics. They're just a letter. They can just write us a letter letting us know what they think, and they can send that in to us. And then at the end, when we have all that material together, we'll schedule a time for you to have an interview. In this case, if you're looking at ministry leadership, the interview will be with Michael. And then once we receive the results of that interview, your entire file with all of its comments will go to the full admissions committee, and we'll discuss the different parts of your application and decide whether this is the right time for you to enter. And for some people, it may not be. We might go back to them and say, we just think it's too soon for you. And for others, we'll say, love to have you, and here's an offer. Pack your bags. We'll see you. We'll see you in the summer. So the application process can actually sort of go ahead as quickly as you get us documents. It's getting those pieces in. Some people can set aside a weekend and just get everything done, and other people, it will take you just longer because that's just the way your life is structured. That's totally fine. If you are interested in applying for next year, the deadline for applying for leadership is January 15th, 2018. So about a month and a half-ish from now, which is hard to believe that we're that close to 2018, but we are. So if you are looking at getting in for 2018, I would encourage you to get in touch shortly or to submit that application quickly and get all the pieces. If you can get them to us before Christmas, that would be ideal, so that when we come back in January, we can do our evaluation and get you a decision, because you do want to know as soon as possible whether you're in or not. In terms of when work starts, you will actually start receiving materials from us on what to read and what to work on starting in February or March. So even though your first residency is until the summer, you will actually be doing work starting much earlier in the year. So that's why the deadline seems so early compared to when your residency is, because that gap will be filled by lots of work and a lot of reading. So if you have any questions about that process or about anything you've heard today, feel free to get in touch. If you'd like to talk to Michael before your interview, you don't need to wait for the interview to talk to Michael. You can email me and we'll get you in touch. We're more than happy to answer any questions you have. If you need more information to get you to that point where you think this is the program for you, then we're happy to do that. You don't need to wait for your interview, although you're welcome to.
One thing about early acceptance as well is that if you don't have a Master of Divinity degree, there may be a course or two that you might be required to make up.
Right.
So the earlier that you decide and you apply, it allows you perhaps to catch one of those courses even in the spring or winter term here at Tyndale. So we have a 1-week intensive season during the first week of January, where you could get a 1-week course. You could possibly take a course in the winter term starting in January, second week of January, that goes until the first week of April. Or you could pick up one of our summer courses, which start early May, and grab one of those 1-week or 2-week one of those courses as well before you come. Again, that's for students who are perhaps have a question mark about their equivalency to an MDiv degree.
Excellent. Thank you, Michael, for reminding me of what I should have said. So when we do the equivalency, some people will have equivalency, no question. Some people will have a very long way to go, and if they have a long way to go, we'll simply tell them you have to go get 9 courses because they just don't have the requisite studies in biblical studies, theology, Christian history, that sort of thing. Some of you may simply be missing a course. It might be a Christian history course. Oftentimes history is neglected in certain graduate work, so you might need that. And so if we think you can get that done in the time frame before the next program really begins, we will give you a conditional acceptance on the premise that you do get that course in. And then, of course, we'd love it if you would take it here, but as long as it's taken at an ATS accredited, or rather, ATS accredited if you're in North America, or an appropriate accredited seminary elsewhere. So that's it for the admissions requirements. And just before we wrap up here, or as we wrap up, Michael, what do you think? We were talking before, leadership's been a hot topic in the church for a very long time now. And why do you think it's still relevant, and what is our hope? Because we didn't just create a DMin to have a DMin. We created this track for a purpose, and you weren't here when we created it. But what's your hope? What's our hope with this track for the church and the world?
Well, I think that could be a long answer,
Sure.
first of all, because I do work in the leadership field, and I think about it a lot. Fundamentally, I think leadership has become a code word for effectiveness. And so, especially in the church world, is that what does it look like? And given the context that we're in, where we are seeing the effects of postmodernism and kind of this move toward post-Christendom, beyond, and post-denominationalism and all of those kinds of things, it's like, what does it look like now? And so leadership is, again, like I said, a code word that says, where are we going and how do we get there? And so I think that process hasn't been as significant in the church as it has in the last probably 20 to 30 years. But even more so now. We're seeing that, we're feeling that. We're also kind of discerning our difference in the Canadian context, and that's something that we haven't actually talked about, is the fact that leadership in the Canadian context looks very different than the rest of North America, particularly in the United States, especially in an evangelical context, in a place where orthodoxy is embraced, like Tyndale, and what does that look like, and how does that look like uniquely in Canada, given some of the factors that we deal with. And so I think I think leadership has been overused, as you've said, Andrew, but I think other times it's also just striving to say, where are we going and how do we get there? So my focus as we come in there is I honestly think that leadership is not really mentioned a lot in the Bible. Different things are mentioned, and we've used leadership, like I said, as a code word to try to describe that. So what does it mean to be, for example, an elder? Or what does it mean to exercise your gifts? Or what does it mean to be called by God in a particular area? What does it mean to be a servant? And so we talk a lot about servant leadership. But I think even before that, what does it mean to be incarnational? What does it mean to live a life in the midst of our context the way that Jesus would live it? And I think all of those things get called leadership. And I think part of our process, certainly part of my process that I've been thinking about, is how do we pull those ideas out and try to separate the biblical ideas from kind of the business world stuff that comes in that I think informs it, and informs it well at times. But what do we use and what don't we use in the middle of that? And that discernment process, I think, is unique to Christian leadership. It's unique because we understand that it's not about power. It's not just about the bottom line. It's not just about being effective or growing an organization or growing a church. It's about people. It's about saying, how do we change ourselves, and how do we change the people around us, or how do we see them changed? And how do we do all of that to the glory of God? And I think that's really the challenge. I think we used to have some of those answers pretty pat at different places, and being a leader or being a pastor was a simpler thing maybe. I think part of the wrestling that we do today is how do we exercise those things in our cultural context and in our church context, in the ministry context. And so that to me is the big challenge, and that's what I love wrestling with too as we go through. And I love hearing the kind of the pushback that we get in the different groups that we meet with and the cohorts that we discuss it with.
Wonderful, thank you. Well, thank you very much for joining us today and making the time. Again, we will be sending out this recording later, so if you missed something, you can watch it again. If you have any questions about the ministry leadership track or the Doctor of Ministry program in general, please get in touch with me, and I'd certainly be able to help you out. And if I can't, I'll certainly put you in touch with our faculty. They'd love to talk to you. So thanks again for taking the time, and hopefully we'll hear from you soon. Take care.
Great. Thank you.